Hello and welcome to my channel. This is Jacob Jewett, and thank you again for joining me tonight if you so choose. God dang it, it's unlisted again. I hate YouTube here. Yeah, anyway, everything goes best laid plans, and then YouTube decides to that they're gonna stop my stuff from going live automatically on the public deal. So hopefully everything's working now. Let me check that. So I hit the ground, trying to hit the ground running, and then good old YouTube decides that it wants to decide when I do things here. So here we go. Let's check. YouTube. You suck so bad sometimes. Let's go. Here we go. And is it public? That's what I want to. Oh, okay, good. It's public. It's public. It's public. Awesome. All right. So, as I was trying to introduce myself, as I found out my stream was, for some reason, still unlisted. My name is Jacob Jewett, and welcome to my twice weekly stream that I do. I do a stream on every Sunday and every Wednesday of the month, and I'm doing that until the foreseeable future. I start these streams at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and that'd be 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, at least until November, when I guess daylight savings time changes a little bit, so it should probably mess with the hours I start on. I may have to start earlier or whatever. Tonight, I'm going to talk about virtualization, and in particular, creating a virtualization setup on your workstation so that you can use it for learning and getting ready for certifications and the like. This topic, for the most part, came from a user asking me a question earlier. Daniel, I forget his last name, he was watching one of my old videos and left a comment on my video about what kind of rig I run as far as for my virtualization setup. And you know, I answered him very quickly on what you would need for a rig, but I'll go over my rig here and kind of talk about it and tell you how it's kind of overbuilt. But as far as virtualization, as far as setting up a home workstation, really, as I answered David on his question, really all you need to get a virtualization station going is to have a workstation that has at least a dual core processor in it with hyperthreading. You could probably even get away with like an old Dell, as long as it had, not Dell, I'm sorry, an old Intel processor, as long as it has hyperthreading, because you want it, in order for it to handle virtualization, you have to have additional processing cores for it to successfully work. There's some instances where you can get virtualization software to work without additional cores, but it's not a good idea, and it doesn't work very well at all. So typically, if you're going to build a virtual station, or you're going to build your home system to handle virtualization so you can do training and stuff like that, you really want to look at high core count and the ability for hyperthreading. You also want to look at high RAM counts. And again, it depends on how many like virtual systems that you want to run on your computer. So when you're using virtualization, your computer is considered the host, and any virtual machine that you have on your machine is called a guest. So how big your processor is, or how many cores your processor is, and how much RAM you have and how much storage you have will be a factor when you start thinking about how much processing power that's all going to take, right? And the more virtual machines you run, obviously the more processors you're going to want, or not processors, but cores in your workstation. And again, hyperthreading helps with that, because hyperthreading allows you to basically schedule the processor to handle multiple lines of code over what a single non-hyperthreaded processor would be able to do. So realistically, if you were doing a virtual, or you were setting up a workstation for home and it's like your normal computer and you want to run virtualization software off of that, my suggestion would be that you would have a processor with at least 4 cores on it. Again, you can do it with 2, but typically you want 4 cores with hyperthreading, so that would give you 8 logical cores, and it would enable you to do a lot more with that system. Some virtualization software, and I'll discuss this a little bit deeper in detail as we move along, but some virtualization software, depending on if it's a free software or if it's like VMware's ESX solution, typically you can have more virtual machines or more guests than you do have actual processor cores or threads to run it off of. Because what the software will do in the background, the hypervisor will do, is it will grant access to that processor depending on what virtual machine or guest machine needs access at the time. So the more cores you have, the more it's able to use, and therefore the more it's able to effectively give you feedback. I mean, as far as like running a virtual machine, it's pretty fun to do once you get going. So the best way to describe it is my virtual or my workstation that I have. I've shown pictures of it in the past, and I'll pull up right now. I'll pull up my website and show you some pictures of it on there, because really I use webcams, so me picking up the camera and pointing it towards my system and stuff like that is really just going to be more of a pain in the butt than it is to really help show what I have. Let me see here. I should have it up front, I thought. Second to none. I redid my website recently and it didn't work out. I didn't like the new form, so I actually went in and changed it up myself, and that doesn't seem to work. So let me pull up some pictures here. So I think I have them on Facebook. Let's see if that works, if I remember correctly. So Facebook, and then pictures. Jacob Jewett, good stuff, photos. Okay. And I'm just batting 1,000 right now, so your photos. I'm sure I shared these with people. I guess it's going to be now LinkedIn. Probably should have thought of this ahead of time, but the whole point of these streams were to be raw, and I guess I'm going raw with it. So let's see if I posted. I know I posted something along the lines of viewed my profile. See, where are my posts? They do not make this stuff very easy to find. So I got, well, it's good that I can at least find Sorry, no, that's not what I want. I want my photos or my postings. Where's my post and activity? There we go. There, that should get me closer to the goal here. I know I posted something on it. You don't realize how much crap you post until you actually go back and try to look at what you've posted in the past or what you've kind of gone along the lines of before. Oh, good God. All right, well, I'm batting 1,000, so let me try this. iCloud. That should work. iCloud, good old stuff. Thanks. All right, so let's pull up those photos. If we can finally get there and actually move along here, that would be nice. You ever want to have more pictures than you intended, let your wife have access to the iCloud. So here we go, getting closer. Getting there. Alrighty, here we go. So the last picture, so I don't go too far. Alrighty. So this is a compilation of pictures of my PC build. And so let me get that pulled up. So demo. And we're going to do, let's do, oh, I'm batting 1,000 right now. Okay, so there's that. Bottom. Okay. So bottom monitor is not working right now. Let me fix that. What the heck is up with this? I'm just batting 1,000 right now, guys. Give me 1 second here. Bottom monitor, and we're gonna go to properties on this. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So let's add another one. Video capture device. We want screen capture. Front view, yep. So we want screen capture. I guess you guys get to take a look at me doing some stuff with OBS here. Well, you don't really because it's not up on the screen. But what I'm trying to do right now is correct my issue that I'm having here. So I'm going to get rid of that. Yes, I wish to get rid of that. And I'm going to add, and I'm going to say display capture. There we go. And we're going to call this new bottom, new bottom. Sometimes OBS can really be a pain in the rear. Oh, well, it's not even capturing that. That's great. Something's up with OBS. Anyway, I guess what I'll do here is there, let me see, browser capture. Can I do that? Browser capture. And we're going to say, okay. Oh my gosh, this is ridiculous. All right, well, I'm going to find another way of doing this. Apparently, OBS decided to screw up on me again. So we're going to go back to talk, and let me see. I can get... Anyway, the system I have here, if I point this in the right direction, and I'll switch views here, and we'll do bench cam. So here's my bench cam, and I'm not going to get it really zoomed in, but if you look over here, is on the top over here is my system. I have a wall-mounted system, and currently I have a AMD Threadripper. It's a first generation. It's a 1950, I believe, the 1950X. And the 1950X has, I have 16 cores. Let me verify that real quick. I have 16 cores and 32 threads. I misrepresented it previously, and I want to make sure that I say that correctly this time. So it is the, if I go back to my front cam here. Anyway, I misrepresented it previously, but it is a 16-core, 32-thread processor, is what my current workstation is. I have 32 gigs of RAM on my system. I do eventually want to get it up to 64 so that it better handles it does a better job of handling like virtualization, the video feed, and doing these live streams, because I'm basically running everything off of my one system, and which isn't too terribly bad. It works for what I want to do, but you know, if you're creating a virtual machine for yourself, more likely it's not going to, you know, it's not going to be at the level of what I have. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead and stop this stream real quick, and I'm going to start it back up. I'm going to restart OBS and see if this corrects my current problem. So be right back. 5 minutes. Okay, I'll be right back. I know this is going to probably kill my stream, but oh well. I'll be right back, guys. I got to figure out what's going on with OBS real quick. Okay, and I'm back. Sorry for that short disconnection, but I figured out what the problem is, and it has everything to do with OBS and needing to restart OBS for some reason. So I'll go back to those pictures real quick so I can show basically the system I have. So let me get back to that. So demo, there we go, and that's top group main. All right, so anyway, the problem I'm having is good old OBS here. We'll get this going here. OBS. We want broadcasting software. That's great. So I want to get rid of bottom main. Let me get rid of that. That's in the way. All right. So what I have going on here is I have let me see if I can get this underneath some stuff here. Front view. There we go. And we'll do that. There we go. That works. Okay. So what I have here is my system that I got built. It's kind of skewed to the edge a little bit. Let me see if I can get that shortened up. This is just going to be a fun educational video here. OBS is having fun, but this is the system I have built. I have an ASRock motherboard on there, and with that I have the Ryzen Threadripper. This is all upside down for some odd reason, but hell, I was having worse problems a second ago, so I don't care. But I, did this to show off to the friends. Basically, this is a 1950 first generation Threadripper 1950X, 16 cores, 32 threads, which allows me to build on that system. And I got good old water cooling and everything in it. So there's my Arctic water cooler AIO system. On top of that, I have 32 gigs of 3200 speed RAM. I have two M.2 storage drives. So these are not storage. This one is 250 gig, and that's what I record my streams and my video production on. This one is my system drive. And then in the back, I have two 3 terabyte hard drives, and that's my long-term storage drives there. So this is the system I'm currently working off of. The graphics card is a 1080, GTX 1080, and it's obviously by the shroud, you can tell it's a Founders Edition. Of course, I got a power supply that's a little bit overbuilt for it, but I've always been one to think that higher end power supplies are usually one of those things that you kind of splurge on. So that's the system I have hanging on my wall, and this is what my actual setup looks like once it renders. This system I use for my virtualization system, as far as like test certifying, and as part of recertifying, I am actually going back to school and stuff like that, so that I'm in a new job role where I have duties in security and stuff like that. But previous to that, I've been a sysadmin for 20 years, and so yeah, that's fun stuff. So anyway, that's my setup, and as I was saying to Daniel in his comment, or in the reply to the comment, my system is really overbuilt for using as a testing and virtualized system. So you may not want to do exactly what I did, only because what I did, again, was really overbuilt. And I started out with a system, Intel 4-core, I believe it was a 7700 processor, and so that had 4 cores, and it had 8 logical processors, so it had hyperthreading. And I used the same RAM that I have in this system, DDR4 32 gig RAM. And I try to run this stream, and I try to run, do YouTube videos utilizing that particular setup, and it didn't quite work out for me. Hence the reason why I went to this higher end system, and therefore you see the result of that. So that's what I'm currently streaming on. This is my main system, and so let's get into it. So there's different types of hypervisors. When you talk about virtualization, virtualization puts what's called a hypervisor layer over your hardware, and there's 2 types of hypervisors. So if I go to my bench cam here, let me get to the bench. All right, so there's 2 types of hypervisors that we typically work with in the industry, and there's a type 1, and there's a type 2. Okay, and the type 1 is considered a bare metal. It's a bare metal it's a bare metal hypervisor, and then the other one is usually your host system usually has an operating system, so it's usually a hosted hypervisor. And the way it's kind of set up is your virtual machines. Let's say if you have like 2 or 3 virtual machines, you'll have different layers of them. That box was a little bit too big, but we'll do 3 boxes over here as well. Okay, so in a actual system where you have a that light's kind of dark, so I'm going to change that up real quick. There we go, and hopefully that helps with light in the foreground there. Okay, so with a bare metal type hypervisor, you'll have your hypervisor as the in-between layer, and hypervisor the hypervisor will act as your operating system. So below that will be your hardware, and your hardware can be everything from the CPU, the RAM, your storage, I'm trying to figure out how to do that. It looks like a blob, but that's supposed to say storage. And then your connected devices. So like any additional hardware that you would have. So any connected or internal devices. So any connected or internal devices that the hypervisor is able to address, it will act as like a gatekeeper to the actual hardware. So your VMs, they think they have their own hardware. So each VM thinks it has its own storage, it has its own CPU that has its own RAM, and it runs on its own operating system. So in a bare metal setup, you'll have your hardware, which is controlled by your hypervisor, something like Vmware's ESXi hypervisor that will sit and run on top of that, and then you'll have your VMs that are guests to that machine. The other thing that you can do is you can have what's called like a hosted hypervisor. And so what happens here is you'll have your hardware just like you had before. So just imagine, CPU, RAM, storage, and other devices, other hardware, right? And then on top of that is your OS. So your OS sits on top of your hardware, and there's 2 parts of your OS. You have the kernel, and then you have the OU, the user interface. So the kernel on your OS if I could spell correctly today, your kernel on your OS can actually manages and controls your hardware on your system. For example, on my system, the way I have it set up is I have an OS or a host OS installed, and in my case that's Windows 10, so I'll just do Windows or W10 is my OS. And then I'll install a software hypervisor, and that's what I'm going to be discussing today. It's the software version of the hypervisor, or the application version of Hypervisor. If I could spell today, it'd be great. A application version of a hypervisor. So we're gonna, when I'm talking today, I'm gonna be talking about a type 2, not a type 1. So hopefully you can see that all right. But I'm talking about a type 2 hypervisor, and that's what I typically use for my testing system. I currently, myself, have both. I have a type 1 and a type 2. Now the type 1 that I have is actually, I have a server rack in my office, and I have a high-end server in there with like 32 cores that's hyper-threaded. So it has 64 cores total, and it has a ton of storage in it. And that I set up as being my host system when I want to do larger end testing, and I want to test like virtualized networks and things like that. But when you're trying to learn, let's say you're trying to learn you know, A+, and you probably can't see that because my screen's in the way. Okay, yeah. So when you're trying to learn A+, Net+, and you know, Server+, and some other certifications, a type 2 hypervisor where you have your hardware, your OS, and then your hypervisor, which is your software. And this, I'm going to cover what this is here shortly. That's why I'm laying down the foundation. And your VMs will all run on your machine that you have just running your regular OS, right? And these software hypervisors, there's a couple different options you have here. Some of them are free, or one in particular is free. And then there's one that you can actually pay for, and I'll show you both because I have both. As far as over here, in a type 1 hypervisor situation, where you have bare metal, you'll need to provide the hardware right here, and then the hypervisor itself. VMware's ESXi host software is actually free, and you can run VMs off of it. So you can have your own hardware if you find it, like you buy an old server off of eBay or something like that. I have a coworker at work that does this. He has a couple servers he bought off of eBay, and then he's gotten a couple of ESXi hosts on those. So each piece of hardware has its own host, and then he runs his VMs off of that. He also runs other software that helps run like VMware, like vCenter, and you know, like auto. Oh, I'm gonna mess it up. But a lot of, you know, the software that VMware licenses. So there's a free version of VMware, and then there's the paid version. Usually the paid version to use, like, you know, HA or high availability and stuff like that, or vMotion. It's finally coming to me. vStorage, vSwitches, things like that. That's all offered through VMware, and it can get quite expensive. I will show you a trick to where you can get this software and you can run it in your own environment, meaning your own testing environment. The option that I show you to get this software cannot be used in a production environment, meaning you can't really make money off of it because that's not how it's licensed. It's licensed as an evaluation, and typically these licenses that I'll show you will last about 365 days, and then they're done. So you really don't want to run a production network off of these. Neither one of these examples that I'm going to show you today will you want to run a production network off of. It's not a great idea. If you're going to run a production network, you want to do your research, get the proper hardware, make sure you get the proper licensing, because even though VMware offers ESXi is a free installation that you can run, and you can run VMs on it. It has no additional features such as vMotion and HA and stuff like that that make VMware very robust and fault tolerant and things like that. So I'll talk about that later. But again, today I'm really going to focus on just type 2 hypervisors. Let me get back here. Okay, so let me turn off that light behind me. That might help. Turn that sucker on. All right, so basically what I'm going to talk about is the software that you can use to really get you on the right track of getting your own hypervisor and getting your virtual machine started. So a lot of times what you'll want to do is you'll want to kind of, when you're studying something, okay, so like you're studying A+ or Net+, you really want to get yourself into the software, right? Because you may buy a computer today at the store and it has Windows 10 on it, but customers that you help and service, a lot of times they'll have older computers, and the answer is not always, oh, let's replace your computer. Typically, customers don't have a lot of money, or they don't just have the pocket change to just go out and buy a new computer every time you show up. Oh, you're not running the latest operating system. Guess what? You need a new computer. That's never like really a correct answer. And if you're taking the A+ certification exam, they will tell you that that's the incorrect answer, right? So one of the other things you'll notice in the A+ exam, they don't only test you on Windows 10, they test you on Vista, and they test you, well, they used to test you on Vista. They will ask you some questions, but they'll definitely ask you about Windows 8.1, and they'll ask you about Windows 7 in the current version. Now, the current version of the A+ exam is the 220.901 and the 220.902, and so it behooves you to really get used to the software. CompTIA suggests that before you take a certification exam, that you have at least a year's experience in the field that you are certifying for. Which makes it very hard for most people, because most people don't have a year of experience. They're doing the A+ certification to really just get their foot in the door. So typically that is what most employers require, especially like repair shops. They require you to get your A+ certification. And so you may not, before you get into actual repair shop and before you get the certification, you may not have the exposure that you want to like a Windows 8.1 and stuff like that. And you'll kind of see as I show, a lot of the stuff I do is also, I go further back. So I have installations for Windows XP, I have installations for Windows 2000, Windows 2003, things like that. I keep all those installations because there's been times where I'll get a customer call up and they need me to repair a piece of integral software that they use for their doctor's practice, like some kind of scheduling software. And I'm probably not the first to tell you that doctors can be very cheap. And so I had this one customer one time, this blood testing center. They were a lab, and all they did was test blood and stuff like that for HIV and various things. Their server that they operated their company off of was a Windows Server version 5. So it was version 5.5. So it was a Windows Server 5.5, and as far as I remember, not many people use that anymore. It had been years since I had seen one, and this was like 3 years ago. I was trying to do repairs on a Windows Server version 5.5, and you know, I basically had to search like crazy to find any answers on it, because the way Windows Server 5.5 works is completely different than how you would work with Windows Server 2016 today, or even 2012. So it's very important that you set yourself up an environment where you can test these things, and that if you can, get your hands on software or installation software so you can actually play with it. And again, it's important in your certification exams to really know this stuff, because the way you do something in Windows 7 compared to Windows 8.1 is different, as the same as it goes for Windows 10. You get into Windows 10, the way you do something there is completely different than how you would do it even in Windows XP. There's some commonality with Windows. There's really, usually 3 to 4 ways to skin a cat. You can go to Control Panel, or you can go to Run and type in a command, or there's multiple ways of doing the same thing, but CompTIA is going to really test you on that. Okay, hi, I'm interested in Windows Server. May I know how the current career growth if I begin now? Yeah, certainly. So if you're interested in Windows Server, yeah, there's still growth in it. The way things are changing in the industry are a little bit different than they were even like 2 or 3 years ago. So a lot of on-prem or on-premise servers are moving to the cloud, but there's a lot of customers that still have what's called a hybrid setup. So you'll have on-prem server, and then you'll have it connected to services within the cloud. Most companies I know, at least in the U.S., I see that you have a different country's flag on your image. So I'm assuming you're from another country, but and correct me if I'm wrong. Your English looks very good, but there's, at least in the U.S., there's still a lot of customers that are not quite comfortable with the cloud, and I don't blame them. Oh, you're from India, cool. So there's still a lot of customers that are not quite happy with putting their personal information in the cloud or their company's information in the cloud. I don't know if you know this, but with like Microsoft and some other companies, when you actually sign up to put your information in the cloud, like AWS, the EULA, or the end user license agreement that you agree to, basically says that the information that you put into their environment, they now own. They say that they won't do anything with it, but the problem is they still own it. So, if someone buys that company in the future, you never know if your information is really yours anymore. So there's some people that are skeptical to that, so they'll still have on-site servers. In the US, I come across on-site servers all the time. The company I work for, we have our own data centers still. So yeah, as far as a career working in server, yeah, there's still very much a possibility of growth in that career. Hopefully that answered your question there. So again, as you may have seen as an example here, I always answer questions. It's not a problem. I'll answer it to the best of my ability, but I'll continue on. So A Plus and Net Plus and Server Plus all require you to have knowledge in the field that you're testing against, right? So it's always good to set up like a virtual environment. And so I've pulled up some of those software to show you what you could use. And they range from free software to, of course, software that would require you to actually pay for it. So let me renew this logon before I share my screen. And let me see, Cisco Academy, there we go. Renew this logon real quick. It timed out on me, which is fine. Cisco Academy, let's try that again. I know it works because, there we go. All right, so what we have here is I may have to do some adjustment to my demo just because I was having a problem with OBS earlier. So let's try this here. This will work. Okay, so there's multiple pieces of software that you can use as your hypervisor. As we talked about earlier, I use a Type 2 hypervisor, where again, my operating system, my hardware is here, my operating system's here, the application software or the hypervisor is here, and then my VMs sit on top of that. So there's a free version of virtualization software. It's offered by Oracle, which, you know, sometimes I'm not too big of a fan of because Oracle has this thing where they like to sue their own customers. But anyway, Virtualbox at this point in time is free. And so you'll download that, and this will be your software hypervisor. And this will allow you to actually run virtual machines on your machine. So if I were to pull up Virtualbox, because I pre-installed it, if I were to pull up Virtualbox, you would see here that I don't have any VMs here right now, but if I wanted to do a test box, let's say, for example, I wanted to run Windows XP, okay? All I have to do is hit New, say XP box, or just XP. It automatically knows by the name what I want here, so it's saying Windows XP 32-bit. I have 32 gigs of RAM on my machine. Windows XP doesn't require that much, so I might just throw 1 gig at it again. Windows XP will run just fine on 512 megabytes, so let's do that. 512 should be fine. I'm only spinning up the operating system. I can carve out and do like a hard disk, a virtual hard disk. So I can just create that and hit next. It'll do 10 gigs, the default. Here, usually what I'll do is I'll change this from a Virtualbox disk image to a VHD or a VMDK. And the reason why I'll change this from a VDI is because the VDI format for the hard disk type is special to Virtualbox itself. That's its format. So being that it's specialized to Virtualbox, it's not really transferable. But VHD or virtual hard disk and VMDK are universal, meaning if I wanted to take this virtual machine and port it over to VMware, I could using a VMDK. So I'll usually do a VMDK or a VHD. After I hit next, it'll ask me what I want to do, if I want to do dynamically allocated or fixed size. What this means here is if I do a dynamically allocated, I told it earlier that I want a 10 gigabyte hard drive, right? So if I want a 10 gigabit hard drive, what it would initially try to do is it would try to carve out that 10 gig of space on my physical hardware, and that 10 gig of space would be dedicated to that file, because these virtual hard drives end up as files in the end, okay? They end up as like .vmdk files or .vhd files. And so, you know what, I described that earlier. I talked about for if you're just starting out, my system is a little bit overbuilt, and I'll show that. So I have a thread ripper, and so I have tons of cores. But usually what you would want is Your minimum setup would be a 2-core hyper-threaded CPU with, I would say, at least 8 to 16 gigs of RAM, and probably at least a 512 gig to a terabyte gig hard drive, depending on how many virtual machines you're wanting to spin up. The more virtual machines, the more cores and the more processors, or not more processors, but the more hyper-threading is important. So I'm running my YouTube live stream and virtual machines and all that stuff off of my one system that I have set up here. So in that case, I went a little overkill. I have the Threadripper 16-core, 32-thread. I have 32 gigs of RAM. Again, that's a little bit overkill, but as a start, my box before this was a 4-core, 8-thread. So it was a Intel i7 7700 chip, if I remember correctly. I believe it was 7700, and it had the same amount of RAM, because I'm using the same RAM that I used in that previous system in my new system. So it's 32 gigs of RAM. And again, that may be a little overkill, but basically it depends really on how many virtual machines you're going to run and what the demands of the OS that you put on that guest machine. So again, I mentioned that in the beginning of the video, or the beginning of the stream, but more than happy to answer it again for you. So where I was talking about dynamically allocated space, if you select this, what will happen is that file that the virtual drive is created on, the VMDK or the VHD, will only be the size that you actually use. So if I allocate 10 gigs of hard drive space in the virtual machine, and I only use 3 gigs of that, the VMDK file or the VHD file will only be the 3 or 4 gigs that I used. If I select fixed size, what that does there is it will allocate the total size that I allocated. So if I say I wanted a 10 gig virtual drive, that file for that virtual drive, so the VMDK or the VHD, will actually on my physical hardware disk will show up as 10 gig. So that space is allocated. I can't use it for anything else. So typically I'll do the dynamic allocated. So I'll move on, and location and file size. This is basically where you're going to store that file. Typically what I'll do is in my virtual box, when you do the default installation of Virtualbox, it tries to store it under your user information. I don't like it doing that, so what I'll do is I'll tell it to go to like my slow storage, which is my physical media that I have, and usually I'll throw it under like training or development. I didn't create one here for it, but let's say we'll do that. So virtual, throw it under there, and you see that VMDK, and you'll see when I create that VMDK, it's allocated for 10 gigs. I can go up to like 20 or higher. As you see here, I can do like 2 terabytes. And the reason why I can only go up to 2 terabytes on this is that is an actual limitation of the file structure. So the VMDK extension can only go up to that 2 terabyte. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and create that. And if I go down here and I open up my folders and I go back to my slow storage, you'll see that that VMDK that I created is only like 2 megabytes. And the reason why, again, it's only 2 megabytes is because I told it to dynamically allocate. Had I told it to do the fixed, it would have been 20 gigs right off the bat. Okay, so we got that machine created there. And what I'll need now is I'll need installation media. If I were to start up this machine right now, it would just look at me funny. So if I hit start and I do a normal start, it'll pop up a screen and it'll say, hey, I don't know what to do. You haven't given me anything to do. If I say just go to the host drive, it'll still look at me funny and it'll basically fail out just like any machine would. So since I didn't give it anything, it's going to sit there and kind of try to do something, but eventually it's going to fail out and it'll say no bootable medium found. Okay, and this would be similar to you having like a physical piece of hardware and you misconfigured the CD-ROM drive or whatever the case, and so you put bad media in it or something like that, right? Well, the other option is you can use a CD-ROM and do like installation. Like this is the old original install disk from Dell for what used to be one of my customers' systems. They allowed me to take it so I could have it for my archive. And what I do is I convert this to what's called an OSI file. And it's an image of this that exists on my computer. And so what I've done is if I want to now install Windows XP on this machine, I will direct it to that installation. So if I go to devices and I go to optical drives, I can say, okay, I want you to go to a disk image. And since I've created disk images, I can go to my slow storage that I got here. I can go to software, and then and I'm probably gonna mess up here because I thought I had these on here. Development programs. I have another way of doing it here. Give me one sec here. This is a little delayed, and the only reason why it's like this is because I decided that I was going to be cool, and I was going to answer a question of a user, and he wanted to know about virtual machines, so I kind of threw this together. So give me 1 second here. Let's see if I got it on this disk. If I don't have it on this disk, I'll probably have to find another way. But let me go back to this screen here, just in case I come across something that I don't want you guys to see. Program files, no, I thought I had it under here. Cisco software, Rexing, development. Well, I thought I moved everything over, and I was off by quite some. Okay, I'm gonna have to move that stuff over. Let me see what's on my external drive here. Drivers, development. Let's see if I have an OSI file on here. OSI. While I'm looking for this, if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and I'm happy to answer during this time. I just got to be more prepared for these things. My fault here. Did I answer your question on the ideal PC for or best practice for Virtualbox? If you're still there, I'd answer your question there. Local disk, H, any Windows. Nope, not there. God dang it. I feel like an idiot. Well, I found something that'll work. Okay, so we're gonna go, okay, I'm glad I answered your question. Maybe I can dig myself out of this hole here. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is this folder here was at, okay, cool. I'm gonna get rid of the, I named a folder profanity, so I'm getting rid of it. And I do have something I can install. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to back out this Virtualbox, and I guess the best example of showing how easy these things are to do is to, I guess, just do it, right? So this system here I set up as a Windows XP box, which isn't a problem. I can I need to go to 32-bit to show you what I want to show you. So what I will do is I'll exit out of that. That's fine. And we'll close this. And power off is fine. And we'll just start up a new machine. So it's not that hard. We'll do Windows 7 on this one. Usually I have all my OSI files in the same spot, so it usually don't have a problem with it. So I'm gonna hit next on this, 2 gigs, that's fine, next. Virtual hard disk now. We're gonna do the VMDK again. We're gonna dynamically allocate that, and that name is fine, that size is fine. And I probably have to, yep, I have to redirect it again. Give me 1 second, slow storage. And we're gonna put that under virt, save, create, and we have ourselves another virtual machine, right? So now this time I'm gonna bring this up like I did before. It's gonna try to turn it on even though it's not gonna find anything, and we'll just hit cancel. And it's going to error out because it can't find the operating system again, which is fine. So we're going to tell it to go to optical drive. We're going to direct it to a disk image. And on this drive here, I happen to have some disk images. Check that out. So we'll put Windows 7 Professional on this box. And you'll see that it can be quite quick. Now, the good thing about OSI files, oh, I'm sorry, you want to create real-time with a Virtualbox host environment, Windows 7, quad-core CPU. In order to improve the performance, is it possible to use Virtualbox to dedicate 1 core and real-time Linux with 3 cores? In my experience, the Virtualbox doesn't really give you that kind of control over it. It's a free piece of software, so like if I close this, I'll go back and we'll take a look. How's that? So if I go into the Virtualbox and I go into settings, I can go to the system and I can do different settings there. But as you see, there's really no selection for cores. I think the better solution for you, if you were trying to do that, would be taking a look at I would take a look at VMware Workstation. So I'll show that next. And in VMware's Workstation software, you can designate cores. You can say, I want to put 2 cores over here, and I want everything else to be my OS. The Virtualbox itself, I've never really tried to dedicate cores because I don't think it's ever had that kind of option. So like you got disk encryption and stuff like that, but and they could have added the option, but I've never personally done it. But again, I will show VMware's Workstation software here in a second. Yeah, I'll definitely show you the differences. So right now I'm showing Virtualbox, but I'll in a second I will also show the VMware Workstation, and you'll see that there's more customization there. So yeah. So I'm going to cancel this and go back here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell it where the installation software is. Let me open that back up. It's going to fail out. And then I'm going to tell it where my installation media is. And so these are OSI files again. And I have a library of them because anytime I got like an installation disk, I did my best to make a copy of it just so that I had it to go back on and study on. And again, I highly suggest that you do that. And if you see there, I also have Ubuntu. So that I really do have like all of them that I can find. So, and I've been calling them OSI. I'm dyslexic as it gets. It's ISO packet, ISO. It's a, yeah, sorry, I'm dyslexic. So anyway, so we're gonna select a Windows 7 Professional, and if I tell this machine to reset, it should then now boot from that Windows 7 Professional installation as it does. So you're gonna see that, and it's going to be quite fast because, of course, Windows 7 is an older operating system, and the hardware I got it on is kind of the bee's knees, I guess you could say. So we just do a normal installation here. Since I'm showing virtualization, I'm not showing everything that is involved with the installation. That would be like an A+ thing, but we'll do that, and next there's our hard drive it sees, and this installation should happen pretty quickly because it's all running off of solid state media except for where the drive is being stored itself. So this stuff usually should go pretty quickly. But that's, I mean, aside from going in and working with Windows, that's basically all you really need to do to get yourself a virtual machine going using Virtualbox. Now, you can add additional like network adapters, so you can do like a virtual network. And what's kind of neat about this is if you go into network settings, when you go to add an additional adapter, well, the machine has to be off to do that. But when you go to add an adapter, you can make it a NAT where it'll do a network address translation between your physical machine and the virtual machine. So basically, with NAT enabled, when this system is done installing, it will be connected to the internet. And it'll do that just because it's using my host or my physical box's internet connection to create that connection. But you have the other options in there. You can do a NAT network, you can do a bridged adapter where you have a network adapter on your machine that you just dedicate to the virtual machine. You can do internal network. Internal network, all that is it creates a virtualized network on your physical box. And so all the virtual machines that you spin up in Virtualbox, if they're all running at the same time, they can see each other, but they can't see any other system on the network. So it's a way of like, if you're trying to prepare for a test for like server or workstation, you can literally spin up a server instance or VM and have that on the internal network setting. That fly is going to drive me nuts. You can have that set up on the internal network, and so you can set up DHCP, you can set up all these different network services, and since they only exist on your physical box, it's not going to affect the rest of the network. So if you were like in a corporation network and you were or you were in an enterprise network and you were trying to practice and they gave you permission to practice using Virtualbox, as long as you use the internal network, all the communication is going to happen within your machine. It'll never go outside of your machine, which is nice. I've had some people that thought they were technicians in my company, and they'll spin up Virtualbox because, of course, it's free. And when they spin it up, they'll set it up as a NAT, they'll set up a server, and they'll set up DHCP, and all of a sudden I have a rogue DHCP server on my network, and that's not what you want, right? So, but you can change those settings and get it going. As you see, this is pretty close to being done. But I could waste time and show you that it does boot in, and it does work, and it does function. But if you get to the installation screen, you should know that this is going to function once it's done installing. So I'm going to go ahead and kill that. And I'm going to go ahead and do the bad thing and just power it off. I really don't care. And I'm going to also shut it down. Now, the difference between Virtualbox and VMware is it's really nice in the fact that you can go down down into your system tray and let me see if I can adjust this screen here. There we go. You can go down in your system tray and you'll see that there is, once you install VMware's workstation, you will see, I hate these notifications, sleep now, forever. Give me one sec here, go away. Clear all notifications. And I don't care. Okay, so anyway, if you go down here, you should see this icon right here that says no virtual machines running. What's nice about this is with VMware's workstation, it actually, if you have virtual machines that you want to start up when your system starts up, you can do that with VMware's Virtualbox. Or not Virtualbox, but VMware's Workstation Pro. You can't do that with Virtualbox. The problem with Virtualbox is every time you want to start up your VM, you have to go into the software and start up your VM. If you were to close this or close out Virtualbox, it would then kill that session. So that's another thing. So if you're, earlier, the user I have online watching right now, he said that he wants to run a Linux box with a dedicated, a real-time Linux with a dedicated core. And I'm assuming that when you start up your workstation, you want that to actually start up at the same time that you start up the workstation. Unfortunately, with Virtualbox, it doesn't do that. You have to manually start that up each time. With VMware's workstation, it will do that automatically. If you identify a virtual machine that you want to start up every time your system starts up, it will do that. And that, again, is this down here. So you can get into VMware's workstation by double-clicking on this, and it will open up VMware Workstation. I have the latest edition here. And I'll show you, again, I'll show you how to get that here shortly for a lot less than what you would pay for it normally. But that's there. You can also get to this by icon on your desktop. You'll see mine is right here. You can also get it through the Start menu. So you'll notice that I have an evaluation edition, and that's because I belong to what's called VMUG's Advantage program. And the VMUG's Advantage program allows me to actually have evaluation software for longer than what they would give it to anyone else. So if you go on to VMware's website, pretty much all their software, every piece of software they have, they'll let you test it out for like 30 days. But after 30 days, you're cut off and you can't get another one. With VMUG Advantage, you get, as you see here, I have 402 days on this current installation. And that's because they give me a license key that allows me to have this for my personal use and non-commercial use for that time period. So here's the VMware Workstation software. And to create a new virtual machine, it's as easy as clicking on that you want to start a new virtual machine. I can hit next. It'll tell me, okay, I would like to know where you want to install from. I can tell it that I want to pick an ISO from my H drive. and I can do Windows 7 Enterprise if I want. It'll tell me, it'll detect the operating system that I chose, and then I can either that, or I can tell it that I want to install the operating system later. So I'll hit next. I can do some neat stuff here. So it makes it easier for you. It will allow you to create an initial user. It'll also allow you to put the license key in, so it does all that work for you. Is your data secure as far as what? Is your data secure in VMware Workstation? Or is it secure in Virtualbox? Because your data is only going to be as secure as your local system. So if your local system has no encryption on it and has no like protection on it, then it's going to be accessible, and the VMDK could be corrupted. So there's other things. VM Workstation, it is protected in the fact that it'll run like just any other system. So again, it comes down to how well you harden it. VMware Workstation itself is pretty secure, but it operates again on your physical workstation. So therefore, it's only as secure as your physical workstation is. So if you put your physical workstation, the system that you're running off of, if you put that directly on the internet, like you take your ISP's connection and you connect it directly into your network card and you give it a public IP, it's not very secure. If you have no firewall, it's not very secure. If you don't use natting, it's not very secure. Again, it's only as secure as your workstation is. Yes, you can run it locally without an internet connection. It does not require internet connection. I believe it does require an internet connection for the initial license setup, but once you set that up, it doesn't call home as far as like other than checking for updates. It shouldn't call home. And just like you did with VirtualBox, you can set up your own network, a virtual network within the VM Workstation, and it can communicate locally only. So if you want your computer, your workstation that you're using to be able to connect to the internet, but you don't want your virtual machines to be able to, you can set that up too. That's not a problem. Okay, so I'm going to just skip this here. You can put a product key in here if you want. So that's no problem, and it'll automatically do that part of the installation for you. If we that's fine. We'll just continue on. I can name my virtual machine. Again, it does the same thing as VirtualBox did. It tries to put it under your personal profile, and there are settings within VMware Workstation where you can actually tell it where you want your default storage to be, and it tells you that here. You can go to Edit, Preferences, and set that. Since this is a newer installation and I haven't done that already, it's going to try to put it under my user drive, which I don't want it to do. So I'm going to direct it again to my slow storage disk that I have. There we go, and I'm going to direct it back to the virtual folder, and there you go. So it'll go there. The virtual machine name is fine, and we'll hit next. Okay, existing virtual machine, still the same location that caused problems, including loss of. Okay, well, we'll just do this. Win7. There we go. That should solve that problem. Again, this is the same thing as before. We can select whether we want to use multiple files or a single file. We're going to tell it single file. The reason why I would tell it single file over multiple files is I want it, it says that it's easier to move, but I'd rather just deal with one file. I don't want to try to copy multiple files. I just want to get one file and move it. If I was making something extremely large, I would choose the multiple files, because it does allow for easier transfer. Like you can use Xcopy or something like that, or robocopy within command line. And if you have a 16 core 32 thread processor like I do and solid state storage, you could technically transfer 32 files at one time, right? So it allows for that capability. So we're going to hit next on here, and then it gives you the settings that it's going to use, and we're going to say power on the machine. When we hit finish, it's going to boot up that machine, and it's going to start the installation for us. So as you see right now, it's creating the disk. Hopefully it doesn't take too long here, but it'll create the disk, and it'll get everything going. And once it gets up and running, I'll show you that you can in fact assign cores to the virtual machine that you have. So I could have hit customize hardware there and told it that I wanted to add cores then, but with most operating systems, including Linux, it's not a problem to add additional cores. Usually the problem is when you take cores away. So yeah, I'll show that, and then you'll see if I bring up my task manager and the processes I got going on, you should see the difference in that. So here's my virtual machine, and it's going to bring up a console for it. Now you can keep it in a tabbed view like this, or you can break it away to where it's its own separate box, but it's not a problem. So, following software is available for download. Yes, download. Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's, remind me later, that's fine. Do not show this again, okay. So as you see, Windows is starting up here for the installation, just like it did in the Virtualbox. Yes, you can move the storage location anytime you want. Where the storage is really doesn't matter to VMware. Again, this is a hypervisor, this is a type 2 hypervisor, so the OS is really controlling the hardware of the system. So as long as your OS or your operating system on your computer, not the virtual machine, but the computer itself, as long as it can see the file location, the workstation software can find it. I would suggest, however, that you have your virtual machine turned off during that move. Unless you have like vMotion or something set up and you're testing that, yeah, you're going to want to shut off your machine before you try and move storage. But if I go into the settings of this system, I may not be able to change it at this time because it is currently running. But you'll see that I can, with VMware Workstation, I can not only assign additional RAM, I can go in and assign individual processors or cores. So basically the way processors and cores work, processors are the actual cores, and the number of cores are logical. So meaning they're logical cores. So they can be hyper-threaded cores, or they can be actual physical cores. Okay, and the other thing to note on this is the hypervisor itself, that being the virtual machine or the VMware Workstation software, that hypervisor layer, and I showed it before, and I don't know if I'll just refresh real quick. So we have, again, we have type 1 and we have type 2. If we had a bare metal machine with no OS on it, the hypervisor would sit on top of the hardware and the VMs would run on top of that. Okay, and that would be if you were using like VMware ESXi. What we're using is a type 2, which I use for my test environment, for when I'm preparing for a test or I'm preparing or I'm studying. And that you have your hardware, which has an OS or your host OS system sitting on top of it. And then you have your application hypervisor, which in this case that now we're showing VMware's Workstation. That hypervisor is VMware's workstation software. And then the VM that we're installing over that is sitting on top of this. So this controls the interaction between the OS and the hardware. So when you designate a CPU to a virtual machine, this hypervisor is saying, hey, OS, I want this much CPU. And if you do what's called, let me switch back here. If you do what's called over allocation, the over allocation is like you have 16 cores, 32 threads or whatever, and you allocated, 48 cores. Obviously, if you allocate 48 cores, you don't actually have 48 cores. So what the hypervisor software will do, and what the OS will do, is it will do basically a switching where it'll try to share those cores with other systems. So if you want a one-for-one, just don't over-allocate. You over-allocate, it becomes a problem. Especially if you're doing production stuff on it. So let me go back to demo. And so you see this installation is pretty close to being complete. But once we get this up and running here, it will, the operating system itself will think that it's literally by itself. It doesn't know that it's sitting on top of a virtual machine or a hypervisor, because the hypervisor and the OS do all the work to basically act as its CPU, its RAM, its everything. So as far as the software is concerned, on this guest VM, this guest VM thinks it has its own CPU, it thinks it has its own RAM, it thinks it has its own hard drive, and what we allow it to see is all it sees, okay? And of course in your settings here you see again, we have the RAM allocated, we have one processor allocated. You should see one processor in my actual array that's going super crazy. That could be that one. I don't know for sure. Unfortunately, Task Manager doesn't really do a good job telling you what is doing what. But yeah, anyway, so that's got one processor allocated to it. But as soon as this system reboots or I turn it off, I could add additional cores to it without a problem. So, and as far as storage locations that you asked about earlier, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. But as far as storage locations, all you would have to do is make sure that your virtual machine is off. And when it's off, this becomes editable. So you can edit it and you can tell it where you want it to store. Okay. So up until now, you're going to see that this acts as if it was an actual physical machine. It's doing the whole restart bit. It's doing the whole adjusting of the display as it would if it were actual physical hardware. And when we boot into it, you'll see that what we have available to it is exactly what we allocated to it. So get that through, log on here. And we'll be pretty close to being done here. There we go. So now if we were to, give it a second here. It's still taking over here for a second. It's still trying to do, what VMware Workstation is doing right now is it's actually installing its tools to help us with the whole transfer of the keyboard and mouse situation. So it does all that automatically, and that's what it's telling us down here that it's doing. So when this starts, it's going to install VMware tools, and that that'll allow us to do a whole bunch of other things with this. See what types of network adapters. Give us a demo on how it works. Yeah, that's a deeper subject. I can explain it. It's basically the same as I explained with the Virtualbox, as in NATing allows it to share internet connection with your physical box. I can show you some of that. Internal is going to keep the communication internal to the hypervisor itself, not going past the OS to your network card. If you do like a bridged mode, it's going to dedicate, if you have like, on my personal machine that I have set up here, I have 2 NICs on it, or network interface cards. And so I can designate one of those network interface cards as an actual, I can designate that as a direct connection to the virtual machine. So here's our operating system. It's fully installed. And if we go to, it's being a pain right now, give it a second. Press G. Control G. Eventually it's going to let me do what I want to do with it here. Oh, it's frozen up. Oh, duh. You can't do much when you have the settings open. Maybe I should close the settings. So now it should work fine. I'm a moron. Anyway, so when we go into computer, we'll see our disk that we allocated. We will see various, if we go into manage, and we pull up device manager, we will see that everything's in there. It even thinks it's got batteries, right? So Bluetooth radios, I have a Bluetooth driver on my system, so therefore it sees that. Computer, it sees that it's a 64-bit base system. Disk drives, it sees that it's a VM, but basically it designates each individual thing. Now, if we look at it right now, I can click on Internet Explorer, and it will go to the internet. And the reason why it will do this is because it's using NATing. It's using my physical computer's connection to connect to the internet. So there you go, it's connected. It'll tell me it's out of date because of course Windows 7 is way out of date from a fresh install. But if I were to go and go to settings here, I think the NIC, I think that's one of the things I can do while it's on. So if I go to NAT here, you got, I can tell it to connect at power on. I can disconnect it. If I go and unconnect it right now and hit OK, when I do that, you'll see that the connection dies. I can go back to it. I can go to settings. And I can, again, go to the network adapter and hit connected and reconnect it. Yes, you can share folders from the host machine. That is a possibility. Yes, basically you can do basically anything with it. You can share folders from the host machine. You can set them up as a network share to where your host machine sees it. There's all kinds of things you can do with it. So like if I go here and hit OK and get the network going again, I can go up to manage, let's see, where do I want to go? Share permissions. Share VMware, was it? That's not what I want. This is an updated version, so it's kind of in a different place. But yeah, you can share between and actually get files to go back and forth over it. That's not a problem. That's kind of, again, outside of the scope of what I was going over with this video, but you can do it. So let me see, settings. It's probably in disk management here. Let's do that. So hard drive, yeah, advanced. Yeah, I do it at work. So again, this is a newer to me. So yeah, but you can in fact do it. But anyway, going back to your network question that you had, you see the options that you have here. You can do host only, where it's shared with a private host network. And when you do host only, it's the same thing as if you did internal only. And what that does is it makes it so that only if I had like 6 or 7 virtual machines here, they would all be able to communicate with each other, but they wouldn't be able to communicate outside unless I created another network adapter. Because I can create additional network adapters. I'm not stuck with one. The default is one, but I can go down here and I can add additional network adapters. I can also add additional hard disks. I can add various things here. So it's still, just because you have this initial setup doesn't mean you're stuck with it. If I do a custom specific virtual network, I can do that. I can use host only. I can use the NAT that it has set up. I can, with these VM nets, I can do, if I was testing VMware and I wanted to mess with like a management network and so on and so forth, I can choose these different networks and have that transfer go over that. As well as they do outside of these standard settings here, or this like bridge mode where I connect directly to a physical network, I can actually hit NAT and that's NATed out, but there's also the capability on here of they have their own network setup tool on here. Wait a second. Where is it hiding? Virtual Network Editor. So if I click on that, I can actually add additional networks. So it's pretty powerful. So I can set up my own subnets. I can do a bridge connection. So you have these 2 VM nets here. I can add an additional one. So I just go to, what I did there was I escalated my rights, even though it blanked out the screen. I escalated my rights. So now I can go in here and I can actually set up a bridged connection and I can tell it to go to whatever host adapter I want it to go to. So if I want it, my current connection, if I go and look at my internet settings, it says I'm using Ethernet 2 as my connection. So what I can actually do here is I can designate my Ethernet connection 1 as being that dedicated bridged. So that NIC on my machine will be the bridged adapter. And so if I do that bridged, all I would have to do is connect a network cable to it. But if I were to go apply here, hopefully it doesn't kill my connection to the stream here, which is a possibility it could do. We'll find out. Nope, it didn't. Good. So it created it, and I get out of it. So what that should have done is that should have bridged the connection to my network card that I have on my computer but do not have connected right now. So theoretically, if I go into settings here and I go to my network adapter, or I add a network adapter, I should be able to add an additional network adapter, hit next. I should be able to tell it that I want it to go to bridged, or I can tell it to go to a virtual network. And that virtual network was, I believe it was 0, wasn't it? I believe it was 0. Let's hit cancel on that real quick. You can always back out, which is nice. Virtualize physical machine. Network editor. And, oh, it didn't hold. It didn't hold it. So let's try that again. So change settings. Yes. Should have held it. Oh, it did when I go into that setting. Okay, so yeah, VNet 0. So if I go into that, I'm just going to hit cancel on that. Go to settings here. And go to my network adapter, add one. I finish, and I can go to VMnet 0, which is that bridge connection that I created. I can hit OK. It'll basically add that to the virtual machine. So you'll see that new network adapter shows up as being installed. I'll do that. So it automatically showed that network connection too that I had installed. And now if I go to my network settings here, and I go to adapter settings, you'll see that adapter is connected, but it's not going to transfer anything. But it is actually bridged to that network card that I have on my system. So that's basically it there. So I've shown you two virtualization software systems. Now notice when I close this here, I can either tell it to suspend, power off, or run in the background. If I tell it to run in the background, that virtual machine that I had just spun up is still running. And we know that. I'll tell you that next, actually. So the question was asked, what is the use of the snapshot? Be happy to tell you that. But what I'm showing you right now is before, when we went down to our system tray and we went to the VMware Workstation icon, it was just two black boxes. If we look here, we now have two black boxes with a green arrow. That is an actual virtual machine that's running. It's running in the background. If we were to shut off our machine, our physical machine, and turn it back on, this would come up and this would start back up. Okay? So it'll keep it running. That's one of the advantages of using VMware Workstation. Now, snapshot. This is kind of nice. So a snapshot is this. So here's the icon for a virtual machine snapshot. And what's nice about this is I can click on here and say, I want to take a snapshot. And so I can say new image and take that snapshot. Once that snapshot is created, you'll see it down here where it says saving state. What it does is it takes a picture of the system at this point in time. If after this snapshot is done, I were to go and do something really stupid with the machine, for example, if I were to go and, I don't know, load something stupid on there, like, let's do that. So let's let the snapshot take. Once it's done, I'll do something here. You can use the machine while it's doing the snapshot, but I like to wait. So usually snapshots are faster when oh, you can't see anything? I'm sorry, I'll move that over. I forgot to move it. Hopefully that's better. Okay, so it's what I did to create that snapshot is I went up here to this icon, and when I clicked on that icon, I created a snapshot by naming the snapshot and telling it to take. Once I tell it to take, it makes that snapshot. You should have seen the percentage down here. So now that I have the snapshot, I can make a change to the system. So like if I went to Internet Explorer and opened up Internet Explorer and say, let's say I went to Google. And while we're waiting, to show you an earlier question that you asked, I'll add a processor to this virtual machine so you can see that as well. But so we went to Google, and Google, we're going to tell it we want to install Chrome. And we'll go download now, and we'll install Chrome. So before I took the snapshot, I didn't have Chrome installed. Now I'm downloading and installing Chrome. So once Chrome is done installing here, which will take it a second to do, shouldn't take too long. I have a pretty fast internet connection. Give it a second to finish. Come on, baby. So there we go. We can close this now because that's up. So what I've done is I've installed Chrome, or I'm installing Chrome, and once it's done installing, you'll see that we will in fact have the browser on there. And let's say, for example, that we weren't installing Chrome, but we were installing a rogue piece of software, or a piece of software that we didn't care for. For example, in my line of work, what I do is I set up a virtual machine and I do a clean install. And then as users on the network get phishing email, or they get different pieces of email that are malicious in intent, I open that email and I test the links using a virtual machine. So if my virtual machine gets infected, or I'm allowed to a phishing site that is causing an issue with users possibly going to, I can test that in my virtual machine without a worry of it getting infected because I took a snapshot. So what happens now is you see that Google Chrome is actually installed, right? it's there. I open it up, it opens up a web page. If I were to go up here and tell it that I want to revert back to my snapshot, okay, and I hit yes, what'll actually happen now is my machine will revert back to what it was before I had Chrome on there. So now you see that Chrome is gone. As far as the virtual machine is concerned, Chrome was never even downloaded. So if I go to documents here and I go down to downloads, you don't even see a download for Chrome. Okay, that's what snapshots are for. And you can create multiple of them. So let's say I had this one here and I have a clean install. I install Chrome and I want to take a snapshot there. I can do that as well. The downside of snapshots, what it will do is it will actually split your file. So if I go to my Windows 7 here, you'll see that I have two VMDKs. So I have the original VMDK, which is my virtual hard disk here, and then I have one that's named lots of zeros with a 2 at the end. This is actually my original disk. What happens is when I create a snapshot, all it does is create another VMDK that sits on top of this one. So while I'm using this Virtualbox right now, or this virtual machine, this folder or this file right here is not being touched at all. The one that's being touched is this one. If I add Chrome back in, you will not see this one grow, you'll see this one grow. Okay, and that's because what it does is it uses both to get this in the end. In order for me to get rid of this, or to get rid of the snapshot because I don't need it, what I can do is I can go up to this Manage Snapshots. It will list all the previous snapshots I've had. So there's my new image snapshot. If I want to get rid of this snapshot, I can hit delete and say yes, and what it does is it quote unquote deletes the snapshot. But basically what it's doing is it's taking that second file that I showed you and it's merging it with the original file. So it just becomes one file again. So if I go back again to my slow storage and I go to my virtual folder and I go to the Win7, you'll now see that there's no additional file from that original VMDK. It is now one file again. If I were to take another snapshot, it would show a different file. If I were to take another snapshot after that, it would show another one. So if I, for example, to make these snapshots faster, if I shut down this system, if I shut it down, I can take snapshots a lot faster. So I can take that system down, it's down now, and I have it selected. I can go up here, I could take a snapshot, and that snapshot happens instantly. And if you look at here, there's that snapshot. If I go again and take another snapshot, that snapshot happens instantly. There's another file. This will keep on going. The more snapshots you have, the slower the system will go, or slower the VM will go, because it has to use all these snapshots in order to make that virtual machine work. Typically, you don't want, I would say you don't want more than like 10. And technically, you can make as many as you want. I've known someone to have like 80 snapshots, but I'm live, babe. I'll come out in a sec. Thank you. Thank you. Anyway, you can have as many snapshots as you want, but again, the more snapshots you have, the slower the system's going to go, and the more laggy it'll be. So it's a good idea to not go overboard with them. But if you're doing something major and you know that it's going to cause an issue with the system, or you don't know what the result is going to be, it's not a bad idea to take a snapshot. So there's that. So those are the two snapshots. If I can delete them one by one, and they'll get merged back into the original file. So there's that. Now, I can cover this in more detail later, but what I want to do now is to actually show you where you can get these items. So Virtualbox is easy to get. You get it from Oracle. Just go to virtualbox.org and you can download that file. You just go to Downloads, and depending on what your host software is, whether it's Windows, OS X, or Linux, you'll download that. So if you're running Linux on a Windows machine, you would get the Windows host. So if you were wanting to run a Linux VirtualBox, you would get the Windows host and then do the Linux VirtualBox. If you wanted to run Windows on a Linux host, let's say your physical machine has Ubuntu installed on it, you would download the Linux distribution of it, install it on Ubuntu, and then you could install Windows on top of a Linux installation. So those packages are here, and then they got some extension packs. If you have a problem with this installation, they have older builds available as well. The eval experience. I talked a lot about VMware and their software. What you need to get the eval experience is, number one, you need to become a VMUG member, which is not a bad deal, because when you get into the industry, you want to get involved with user groups and the like, so you can share information and learn from each other. So what you would do is you would sign up for VMUG, and when you sign up for VMUG and get your username and password, you can then purchase the VMUG Advantage. And the VMUG Advantage is like $200 if I remember correctly, but that $200 gets you a year of access to all this. So you get all this. So you get vCenter Server version 6, you get ESXi Enterprise Plus, you get their network, their virtual network tool, which is NSX, and you get 6 CPU licenses of that. You get vRealize, which is their reporting tool. You get vSAN, which is their storage tool that they have, or virtual storage tool. Site Recovery Manager, which is their site migration tool for when you have a site go completely down. You get all that stuff, including if you have a Mac, you can get the Fusion Pro 11, or if you have a PC, you can get the Workstation Pro 15. The difference between Fusion Pro and Workstation Pro, they're basically the same piece of software, just Fusion Pro is for Macintosh or for Apple computers, and Workstation Pro is for Windows-based computers. And that does exactly what I showed earlier. The other tool that I like to show a lot, like if you're trying to learn networking, is this tool called Packet Tracer. And this tool is nice because when you're trying to learn networks, you can build virtual networks, and they're truly virtual. There's no actual communication going on these. This is just a virtual diagram allowing you to kind of learn how switches and networks work, and allows you to see communication. So if I were to open one, I have one on my development folder here. Give me 1 second. Slow development, and see, maybe it's under YouTube. That's probably where it's under. YouTube, and then documents. There we go. So you can build networks like this one here, and you can play with connections, you can play with PCs or virtualized PCs. These are very cut down versions, but basically you can see, you can play with watching communication go from one location to another. And this is a free tool. So whereas Workstation is a cost behind it, this is a free tool. And you get this from Cisco. Cisco makes this for free. And to get this, what you would have to do is you would have to sign up for Cisco's Network Academy, which is free. To sign up, you just register. So if I back up here, let me back up a couple times, maybe 3, 4 times. The Networking Academy by Cisco is free to join. Okay, so all you have to do is register. Once you register, you will get access to their educational tools. That's my email address. I got that published, so I'm not too worried about that. That's what is published on the video, so I'm not too concerned. Okay, anyway, so once you get an account to that and you get into it, you can go to resources and you can download Packet Tracer. Sometimes they make you do a class on Packet Tracer, which is free, but once you do that class, you can get access to the Packet Tracer software, which is, again, right here. You just go there and it will tell you how to download it. So they got multiple versions of it. They keep it pretty up to date. It's a nice piece of software when it's definitely when it's free. So anyway, that's the extent of what I wanted to cover in this video. My wife is kind of beating on the door. She made me dinner, and so I'm a call it a night. But if I appreciate the questions that were asked. I hope that I answered them and that they were helpful. If you have additional questions, please do not hesitate to leave comments in the comment section of this video, especially if you're watching it after it has been streamed. You saw my email address. My email address is in the description of this stream, and it's also in the description of the resulting video from this. So please feel free to send me your questions. I'm happy to answer them. And if you ask a question like Daniel did today about virtualization, it may just end up being one of my live streams or one of my videos. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. Again, I hope it was helpful. I hope that you find my channel helpful. I do this for free. I don't care about being reimbursed on any of this stuff that I do. So please utilize it. My next live stream will be this Sunday at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and it will be at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And of course, if you're in India or any other place like that, the times may vary for you, so you might want to use Pacific time as your starting point. Thank you again very much, and I will enjoy my dinner, and I'll see you guys later. Thank you.